Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Whenever you happenstance into this incredible panel dialogue with the new Untouchables, this is our 31st episode. I can't believe how quickly time has gone, but it seems like the recurring themes that we've established from the very beginning get to play out worse and worse week in, week out, more validation, more credibility, and quite frankly, more news than what we end up getting nailed by several weeks after these dialogues. And so I'm going to introduce the panel here at the moment. Um, from the lower right, first, June Carbone. She is the Rabina Chair of Law, Science, and Technology at the University of Minnesota. Right to her immediate left, of course, is returning from Europe, the former Attorney General of the state of Ohio, but also in private practice, Mr. Marc Dan. And we're so pleased to see you back, health and safety, or I should say safely. And then prior to something that we'll mention a little bit downstream. Of course, right above Marc is the indomitable William K. Black, a gentleman who has just provided ceaseless information, introspection from decades of being inside the machine of understanding corporate fraud and corruption and government collusion and all of the elements that are now on full display in a way that I don't think would shock anybody on this panel, but yet it's still shocking. And on that note, I think we could begin the dialogue. And of course, as always, I'll have descriptions and links below in the description area of this particular podcast. So welcome, and please like and subscribe and share. So I think the first thing that I should probably address, Bill, and I'll address it to you, is in an administration where you have you have stated, you've proclamated, you've given us directly that it survives on lies. And suddenly we see at the outset here, front page of the New York Times, breaking news that the Department of Labor Statistics, the person in charge of that, has just been let go by the Trump administration, again, because I guess telling the truth about the state of the job market. And the question,
Yes, so the state of the job market is very poor and appears to be declining. And it's what happens when you create massive uncertainty in an economy. Because again, if you lying is everything and policy is created by someone who gets up in any particular time and spins some particular lie and such, how can anyone have any reasonable expectations of about what the future is? And if you can't, are you going to hire people? Well, you're far less likely to hire people. So Trump has both created the substantive problem that the statistical people accurately presented, right? And they have a whole process. They come out, and this is not new under the Trump administration. It's what we've done for 50 plus years. The market wants this information very quickly, so you use estimates, and then you get more information over the course of the month, and you do adjustments. So two things happened that got her fired, but they both involve trying to tell the truth, right? So one is the number came in very disappointing, indicating a potential recession in the near future. And the second is the adjustments that are routinely made came in and showed that the kind of job growth reported the last couple of quarters was incorrect, right? It was actually very, very poor job growth. So what we're seeing is a whole passel, basically the Trump administration to date, of having poor economic results in terms of growth and in terms of employment. And because the U.S. had been the world's engine of economic recovery, this is critical not just to the United States, but to the world. So what you're going to see is bad things happening around the world as people reflect these market expectations. The glory of the United States, and it has been a glory for, again, 50 years, regardless of who was president, is that we tried to tell the truth in our business statistics, even though we knew that was politically deeply inconvenient, often to the President of the United States. And we have, of course, destroyed that tradition at the direct instance of Trump. And he didn't just fire the labor boss that deals with statistics. He found someone to step in who was willing to take that position. Now, anyone of integrity would have said, no, hell no. So that's bad. But he also did a blast against the Fed chairman Powell, indicating that he wants to get rid of him. And there was an unexpected resignation from the Board of Governors, which is going to allow Trump to make an additional appointment. And he already had two dissenters in his favor on the board. So he's getting close to control of the Fed, where the glory had been the independence of the Fed from the President of the United States. Not always maintained, by the way. Back in the 1970s, notoriously, the Fed gave in to the president, and the results, most all economists think, were disastrous. So we have moderately recent, that's 75 years ago now, experience with what happens when you destroy that Fed independence.
Well, a lot of ideas come to mind with that, but I'll save those for a different conversation, Bill. I saw, Marc, your head in agreement. Do you have some thoughts you'd like to pick up on based on what Bill was laying down?
Well, yeah, yeah. I mean, it kind of goes to I don't know if we published that Substack post yet, or if we're gonna publish it, but that I wrote from Europe when I was thinking about, we were in Warsaw and Krakow, visited Auschwitz, spent some time in Austria and Hungary as well. And so, I was obviously thinking a lot about World War II and parallels, I don't know, and Bill probably knows this better than I do. He may have even told me this, but the equivalent of the Fed chair in Nazi Germany took a very strong independent position, and it drove Hitler absolutely nuts. In the very same way that it's driving Trump nuts. Now, ultimately, he acquiesced and quit, and the rest is, as they say, history. But he fought hard to continue to maintain honest communications with the public and protect the currency and all the things that a Fed that Bill can better explain, and June can better explain that a Fed is supposed to do. And his but he ultimately acquiesced. And so I think to Jerome Powell's credit, not only that, but this week he also said that student loans ought to be dischargeable in bankruptcy, which made my week, because that's a particular sore point with me and on behalf of my consumer clients, is that they can't, and we came very close to doing that before. But in any event, that's so small in comparison to the bigger picture here, is that there are so many parallels between this administration and the early months and years of Hitler's consolidation of power, creation of the propaganda machine, and then the thing that not just the acquiescence of the head of their Fed, but the acquiescence of the legal community. I mean, every single thing that they did at Auschwitz, and there was actually a courtroom at Auschwitz, which I didn't know, was sanctioned by lawyers. They actually sat and wrote code and administrative code. I mean, this is Germany, for God's sakes. I mean, it's a cultural imperative. And there were rules that were written by lawyers for absolutely everything that they did, as it related to Jews and people from Romas, and even the Russian prisoners that they murdered as well, Russian war prisoners. So it's a lot to think about, but that's where we are here at this point, and we have a president that is following that model. Wasn't there a story in his first term? One of the two books he had on his desk was Mein Kampf. And that he's following it to the letter. Well, that was before. That was actually before he's following whatever chapter two of Mein Kampf would have been, or volume two would have been after World War II, I suppose.
One of the shortcuts of how I frame the madness in ongoing dialogue is to say that corruption births and fuels fascism. And I'm, really reminded, June, of what you've laid out the last, really since the beginning of these discussions, because you've always sanctioned that it took a Great Depression, well, in between two global wars that ultimately would manifest the sort of balance that legally, particularly, that the United States was able to achieve to create those miracles that Bill had basically leaned into earlier. But to Marc's point, also, I was always hesitant to compare Trump to Hitler, but obviously all of the parallels in terms of what they did in the ramp up, particularly the capitulation of law firms. I do know from my Third Reich history that it was the law firms that tried to push back and some were complicit, many fell because they were forced to. Eventually, many of these attorneys would end up being murdered. But I always kind of compared, in my mind, the sort of I don't know, the ineptness of Trump to somebody like I would think of as a caricature of Mussolini. But that being said, you know, the economics you've talked about to some degree that maybe on the other side of this is a Republican fueled potentially depression. Can you pick up on really, I don't know, the kindling that's out there ready to be, thrown a match to light this whole thing on fire?
Well, it's already there. And all we need is the match. So let me comment, put some of this in perspective. First, I've been talking for some time that the move is the destruction of institutions in favor of personalized power. Powell is one of the last institutionalists left. And yeah, Trump hates him for that reason. Something to note, there were two dissenting votes on the Fed on the decision just to keep interest rates where they are. That's unusual. And one of the people, and maybe both of them, are auditioning to be the next Fed chair. That's what those votes are about. They're not about independent judgment. They're not about what's good for the country. They're about how to get Trump's attention. The second thing, he's an idiot. Having job numbers that are weak is the single best argument for what he wants, which is lowering interest rates. So note that he is having a little explosion over something that fits his theory of the case. Okay, and that also tells you both that he's stupid and economically illiterate, we knew that, and that it's all about him, and it's the only thing that matters. But we knew that. Let me add, in addition to that, on this degradation of institutions, that this is also the Jack Welch playbook. So I've said many times, in different contexts, that Jack Welch becoming the chairman of GE in 1980, same time as the election of Ronald Reagan, marks the change in corporate America. And Welch did a number of things that symbolize the new age, not least of which is running his company into the ground. But an important part of it is that what he did was to align executive compensation with reported earnings. And guess what? When you do that, people lie and manipulate reported earnings numbers. And that led Michael Jensen of Harvard Business School, the father of modern executive compensation, to say in 2000, at the end of Jack Welch's reign, I made a mistake. Having incentives for people to lie and to gain the numbers is a really bad idea, because cooking the books skews the information on which CEOs base decisions, and they make worse decisions. He issued a mea culpa, a very prominent one, and spent the rest of his life being paid handsomely for preaching ethics to corporate boards. But in putting that all together, I emphasize it's bad for business. Business has perfected the model. And the Trump playbook makes this all worse. Getting to your point, what happens next? My fear has been that maybe we're going to be like the frogs in the in the water that's beginning to boil. Yes, you're going to be cooked, but it happens so gradually you don't really notice. And that would be politically the worst thing. Um, you know, all the commentary on the tariffs and what's happening now and the economy is this is going to be bad. But is it going to be bad today because the stock market tanks? Or is it going to be bad in ways we don't notice until the entire thing collapses? And I think that's the question before us. So let me just sketch those out a little bit because I think they very much affect what comes next. All of the, Krugman's conclusion this morning, the economist Paul Krugman, is that what's going on now is not the result of the tariffs. It's the result of uncertainty about tariffs. And so you've got, as Bill already explained, refusals to hire, et cetera. The economy is weakening. We're likely to see a recession. We're likely to see inflation. But all of it is pretty mild. The risk in the future are two things. The long-term risks. One is what always happens with tariffs. Okay. And that is American companies cease to be competitive. Maybe we do make more things. Maybe we have more manufacturing, but there won't be good jobs because under the current system where the CEOs call the shots, they will simply oppress the workers in manufacturing plants the same way they oppress other workers today. So you don't bring back the 50s because 50s are a product of unionization and high marginal tax rates. What you do is simply have uncompetitive industries, not necessarily as well run as they are today, and some of us would argue they're not well run today. So you could have a degradation of the quality of the American economy in ways that are gradual, long-term, and really hard to fix. But we're talking about a 20-year cycle. Let's talk about the immediate cycle. The single biggest risk is we have massive private debt. Forget about federal debt for the moment. We have massive private debt. Student loan debt, which Biden did his best to postpone the day of reckoning in the Supreme Court, treating him in a very different way from the current president, continually struck down. Trump says, make them pay, and no bankruptcy relief. That's a heavy load. We have massive credit card debt. We have massive mortgage debt in places that are underwater. That is, the home values are less than what people paid for them and often less than the remaining mortgages, and they can't get property insurance, and they're in the path of the next hurricane, the next flood, the next climate-induced disaster. Okay? All those things happen at once. And the rest of the world decides it doesn't want to bail us out by buying up US Treasury bonds. We could be looking at a crisis that particularly affects the US and takes the rest of the global economy with it. So if you think of the two consequences of the Trump administration, one is the frog in the boiling water, and the other is the frog in the boiling water who jumps out because the entire kettle gets knocked over. Take your pick as to which would be the better outcome.
Wow.
Well, there's one other thing I think that overrides all of this with Trump that we had that's really becoming very apparent is that and nobody seems to all these smart educated business people and academics and law firms that you don't buy Donald Trump, you rent him. And they're not and the idea that all it's going to cause him to and the same that Keir Starmer and the other heads of state are learning is that no matter what deal you make with him today, he's going to wake up tomorrow and want more from you. And that is just that is his nature. That is his insecurity driving his actions and policies. Um, the fact that there's not a general recognition of that, and so you're no better off by capitulating. And that's and of course all the consequences to the economy follow that. So they're not even the people that are doing the bidding, they're losing too. They're no better off than I am.
Yeah, but hang on to that because what at least in the tariff context they're doing is
Yeah.
saying, yes, dear, have whatever
Hmm.
you want.
Yep.
It's meaningless. It's not worth the paper it's written on. You give us something today, we give you vague promises about tomorrow, and tomorrow you're going to run and renegotiate anyway, so we're never going to deliver. They're a whole lot
Right.
smarter than
Yes.
some people
Yes.
dealing with Trump.
Well, the whole thing reminds me of a child's parable, right? I mean, you've got the inept con man slash predicated on lies, and I think so much about the way you ramp that up, June, specifically is what we've learned from Bill the whole time. I mean, the control fraud factor, except obviously those guys are pretty savvy at being able to control the number and how that all works. But Bill, we're looking at predicated on lies, right? Trump thinks of himself as a strong man. I think of him as a straw man, like Marc had just described, right? He's a rent a president, but this is imperialism and the imperial president for powers behind the scenes and all of these transactional scenarios. Can you kind of pick up there at the crisis, I think, of the democracy, but predicated on this your work of control fraud and how the parallels seem to manifest?
Right. So it's the same overall strategy, right? That the best way to rob a bank was through accounting. And you just change the number. And then the question was always, well, traditional economists said, well, that's impossible. The top tier audit firms would never allow that. The top tier credit rating agencies would never allow that. Well, we've run real world experiments, and Trump has seen all those real world experiments. Indeed, he's participated in them. That's the civil case that New York brought and won
Mhm.
against him for lying about the numbers. And he did it in the crudest way possible. He'd tell one group, the tax authorities, one thing, and he'd tell the other folks, the lenders, the opposite thing, right? And of course, all of this was blessed by top tier audit firms and law firms and all of that. So, private CEOs, the robber barons that I keep talking about, have figured out for well over a century. I mean, the robber barons became infamous in by the 1870s, right? So we're talking about a century and a half at this juncture that they could get the alleged doyens of the professional class, the lawyers, the auditors, the credit rating agencies, to give them essentially anything they wanted. And that is what Trump grew up in. So it's no surprise to him that people will cave. It's only a surprise to the sort of the normies, right? Marc and I have seen this literally thousands of times, this caving. Or again, how many times did the credit rating agencies, and there are only three of them, right? So they're monstrously powerful. How many times did they deny a AAA rating to complete crap when it came to the great financial crisis, the things called CDOs? Zero.
Right.
In every single case, they caved. How many of the top big five audit firms and then big four audit firms said no to these fraudsters? Zero. How many times were you unable to find an appraiser you could extort to inflate the appraisal? Pretty close to zero. And there you're talking about millions of times a year being able to do that. So Trump was well positioned to understand that people would cave. The rest of folks who have never dealt with this, who believed in this hyper meritocracy, the stuff from the now the affluence folks, right? adopt abundance. We just need to turn it over to the pros, and that they're an ultimate meritocracy. Indeed, a hyper meritocracy, they began calling them. All of that is a complete lie. Marc has, been dead on in terms of what he calls the tall firm or tall building. What do you
Tall building firms,
tall building
right,
firms? And I
right.
started at a tall building firm.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
was there for
right.
10 years and such.
Yeah, I
And
lasted 10 days at a tall building firm when I started.
yeah, well,
Until
I
I
put
got
up
my
with a lot
business
more.
cards, and I looked at my business card and I said, no, "Who's that guy? I'm out of here." Um,
I'm a lot slower. Uh,
yeah.
so we have seen this. We know that this is this elaborate lie about the
Mhm.
professional class in America,
Mhm. Yeah.
right? It wasn't. It was much more people in the trenches, like these statistics people.
Mhm.
Again, under Republican administrations as well as
Yeah.
Democrat, they made presidents routinely unhappy. That was their job. What is different now, again, is not simply that the president is pissed, but that he felt free to fire them publicly and make it explicit. I don't like the number. It's bad for me telling the truth. So you're fired. But that he could get the next person in line to continue as an
Mhm.
acting,
Yeah.
as opposed to a Saturday Night Massacre situation in which everybody resigns to remove the fig leaf. So we're at that point that they're just happy to stay, right? As each collapse occurs, it becomes easier for the collapse not only to spread, but to accelerate. And that is why it is so critical, why we've been harping on this from day one of these talks about the law firms, the big law firms, as people have said. Instead of making $50 million a year, the guy was going to be faced with making $42 million a year. And that was sufficient to gain. That's how little they believed in the rule of law. That's how little they believed in professionalism. That's why it was all BS and remains all BS from them.
Well, and to go back to June's point, right, that Trump doesn't even know that this could have worked in his interest, right, in terms of the bigger, which is just absolutely absurd and a great point. But further to that, and I hope to domino this as this question kind of sits there. I mean, look, the general population cannot not see the emperor's new clothes. The corruption is so naked and so in your face, specifically about two major events that happened, one today and one throughout the week, right? We just saw, and we know that the MAGA nation is going to respond, you know, in their bodies are going to convulge as a result of this. But Ghislaine Maxwell, although, and I'll finish the thought, Ghislaine Maxwell is being removed from, I guess, maximum security into some posh place, and you know what that means, and what we can, discern from watching what Todd Blank
She's
did.
playing golf with Elizabeth Holmes now.
Oh my
in,
gosh.
in the at the lowest level correctional facility in Texas.
Right. And
Yeah,
that's going to
Which are called
infuriate.
club feds internally.
Right.
right,
And
right.
that's going to infuriate so many people. But let's at least we forget.
Well,
Will it?
or is it? Or is
Will
it?
it?
Or is it? Wait,
Okay.
No, this
because
is
wait a
he was
second.
elected on this.
The
Has he
one person,
uttered
right? Oh,
has
sorry.
he
Go ahead.
uttered one word of sympathy for the victims?
Not one.
Yeah.
He
No.
Wait.
only did
What?
It's
What?
Maxine
all
or
about
Maxwell.
it's
Right.
all
Right.
about
But
she's the victim.
That's right.
And
right.
on top of that, what is the terrible thing Epstein did to him in this latest retelling, which is also a lie, but hey.
Yeah.
He took the
He
property.
stole the
Pro-
person I wanted to do sex trafficking for
right. That
his
he
Right.
sex
considered
trafficking.
property,
Right.
just like the real
Right.
estate deal. Yes.
Right,
Exactly.
right, but Maxwell is the one person that can get him off the hook with his with MAGA Nation because
Because he's going to
and
go
she
into
has
Clinton.
and he is setting that up, masterfully. Because look, I mean, if you're in prison for life, it makes a huge difference where you serve your term. It does, and if he can't get away with pardoning her, which maybe a bridge too far even for the MAGA nation, and he may do that once she tells the truth. But she's not gonna. He's setting her up and trying to create an environment where she will tell his truth, and that will put this behind him. And she's the one person with the power to do that.
Right, right.
Yeah, but with my criminology hat, just one sec.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sexual predators are in danger in the type of prison she's in.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Right? They are the most hated people in that prison. So this is a big frigging deal. It isn't just that her life is better, much better. It's that her life is much safer.
Right, but it's the nature of the lies that can't be unmasked is what I continue to consider in this, postulating this question, because think about, in addition to what happened this week, this absurdity of Emile Beauvais, right? And everything that is further undermined from the Department of Justice that we can all see. And here are two, former veterans of the Department of Justice and an AG from the state of Ohio that got a racketeering conviction that should have been, obviously the sort of structure that the Department of Justice decided to go after Wall Street, which is actually what dominoed this whole thing, right? So can you just capture the essence of this monstrosity, this machine that is just spinning out of control? And obviously the consequences could be, monstrous.
Well, June's up, I think.
Yeah, let me say again, I'm going to repeat my mantra, which is we're moving from a period of institutionalized power to personalized power. Institutionalized power, think of the military. No self-respecting military would take orders from Pete Hegseth. He's selected. Why? Two reasons. He's loyal to Donald Trump and he looks good on Fox News. That's it. He has no other qualifications for the job. He's apparently thinking of leaving because he can't handle the internal infighting. He never could run anything. But if there is anything before Trump that operated as an institution, as the military, it means the uniform is bigger than the man. It means that one's integrity in front of one's troop counts for a lot. It means that there are a set of self-reinforcing ethoses. Now, those ethoses are never very good about dealing with women, but we didn't make that too public, and when it became public, people had to pay consequences. Trump is the opposite of that. Honor, country. No, all power is personalized. All power is based on I do what I want. I hire the people who will do what I want. And consequences for little people, simply the price of doing business. Elon Musk's view, cutting the federal government. If several million people die in Africa, who cares? So that's the mindset. So let's take now the Justice Department. Trump has understood from day one. I mean, the one thing he has been somewhat afraid of is the thought of going to jail. And the more he respects the power of something else, Harvard, the more he is out to destroy it. Because anything that has power that he doesn't control is a threat to him. That's the mindset. So, of course, he has to tank the Department of Justice. It's number one on his list. He hasn't got, when he talks about the Russia hoax, what is he talking about? The fact that the Department of Justice and the intelligence agencies dared to investigate him for something that is true, that Russia intervened in the 2016 election on Trump's behalf. That's true. And the only question is, Trump certainly looked the other way about it. How complicit was it? That's what we never got to the bottom of. But we know from the Mueller report he obstructed the investigation. And we know the Russians did it. So that means he has to destroy all of the instrumentalities that would say no to him. Beauvais is simply the latest.
And we know from the bipartisan report The Republicans said this too.
Well, there's no doubt the Russians did it. Um, and there's no doubt Trump looked the other way. And he is on record in various interviews saying things like, if a foreign government came to you and said they'd help you in your election, of course you'd say, go for it. I mean, he's on record as saying that. The only thing he isn't saying is that there's a quid pro quo with Vladimir Putin to build Moscow a hotel in Moscow. We don't have proof of that. And I don't think it exists because Putin is a much cleverer operator than that.
Well, I might offer just to kind of take it back to both you and, well, sorry, Bill and Mark, from this perspective, um, the magnitude of the Department of Justice's uh, kowtowing to Trump through obviously this whole story with Ghislaine Maxwell, and you both asked whether or not it would be a domino, whether or not they're going to turn the table on the Democrats and everything that means, but just the state of affairs, given the crime and the lies of Bove, yeah, it's a continuation. But I might also add just the idea of investigations and what has to happen, because it's just all paint by the numbers for me. But when you guys are talking about Russia's involvement in 2016, I'm reminded of: do you think Donald Trump acted alone in the insurrection? Do you think he spent time, developing the battle plans, carrying out who was going to show up, how they were going to handle it, how they were going to get the National Guard to stand down, how they were going to house everybody? I mean, it's absurd to think this guy would be a mastermind of anything, right? And so, further to that, please, I don't want to go any further than that.
Okay, so this is the flip side as well of what we've been emphasizing, which is the collapse of the elites. And not just the collapse, but the collaboration of the elites, right? At the Justice Department, we aren't talking about people making $50 million a year, right? Those folks are often devoted 10 to 30 years in the positions, right? And they, in places like Federal Programs Branch, have resigned en masse. Well over half the Federal Programs Branch attorneys, our former colleagues, June and I, have resigned. Over half the entire leadership has resigned. So it's the little people in the scheme of things. And now, of course, I don't really think of them as little people, but that's how the powerful
They were
think of
called
them.
the Munchkins
Yeah, yes,
by the
internally.
Attorney General in our era. We were the Munchkins.
There was actually an internal document that leaked that did call us all Munchkins, type of thing. Anyway, it's the Munchkins, as June has just said, that have shown the courage. So are thousands of federal employees showing that courage? Absolutely. But way disproportionately, it's the people in the trenches, as opposed to the really well paid folks. And in contrast to the private sector, the tall buildings, it's not shocking for the reasons we went through, but it is shameful, utterly, despicably shameful. I do not understand how these people look in mirrors, because I sure as hell couldn't if I did what they did.
Yeah, and I think they're gonna pay over time. They're not going to be able to recruit associates that are of high caliber. They're not going to be able to. A lot of the partners that have any backbone and character are very systematically leaving those firms, starting their finding the joy of a boutique law firm suddenly in their mid career. So I think anybody, just like the Justice Department, anybody with principles is going to be gone from those firms. And it's only going to get worse, unfortunately. There was a bright note, though, that a public interest group did file a bar complaint against the three lawyers that blatantly lied to the judge in the I believe it was in the Garcia case. And I'm glad that that's happening. I mean, that is a serious thing, and at the end of the day, and now in 2 or 3 years, their license could be taken away to practice law.
Jeffrey
But it's
Clark.
an
Jeffrey
what's
Clark.
that? Jeffrey Clark. How
Mention
long did that
Jeffrey
take?
Clark.
Yeah, that was yesterday, right? That he got that they finally and that started in what 2020. So now that was 5 years ago that he that that process took. So there's a lot of due process around lawyer discipline. But at the end of the day, if there's a certainty that people that lie to a federal judge are going to face disciplinary proceedings, maybe they'll be less likely to pull that trigger. At some point, I gotta hope, and I think the best hope for this country is that people figure out that it doesn't matter what you do for Donald Trump today, that you're going to get fucked in the long run anyway. And so there's frankly honor and valor in standing up, and the result will probably be the same. You're probably on the way out no matter what. I mean, uh, one of the other brilliant things they did coming in was this buyout. I mean, I just read yesterday 150,000 federal employees have taken the opportunity to leave. Now, many of them were people who were planning to leave anyway for other reasons, but many people who were saying, I just don't need this, and it was an act somewhat an act of courage and an act of honor to leave an administration that was going to expect you to do things that were unprincipled and illegal. But they made it really easy. They foamed the runway for those guys to leave, and women. So again, I mean, the addition of these Project 2025 guys, the Heritage Foundation, the votes of the world, to the Trump stew of hate and self-aggrandizement, has really created a very, very scary uh, potion. That and that's what makes this different than 2016, when he was flailing against those institutions. And the people who have for all these years wanted to see this disarming of the federal regulatory structure have seized this moment, and they have a community of interest. But at the end of the day, and it won't be long, he will start to turn on them as well. And so I think any benefit that these companies are going to get, these executives, the Chamber of Commerce types are going to get from this deregulation, they're gonna pay for it in the end anyway.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on that. And let me just say I was excited, maybe too excited, that Jeffrey Clark, who was one of the villains in the Justice Department around the January 6th insurrection, has been disbarred. And it was his appointment, wasn't it, Mark, where the normies threatened to resign en masse
Yeah.
if he was
Yes.
appointed Attorney General. Let me emphasize a different point. So I have this new article out called Legal Civil War, published at Georgetown. The Harvard Law Review considered it, and the Harvard Law Review internal deliberations were leaked in this anti-DEI crusade. And so we got to find out what they thought about our article. And one of the reasons they didn't take it is we didn't have a solution. And the reason we didn't have a solution is our thesis is what legal civil war is once the legal order breaks down, once you're at Fort Sumter and neither side is going to resolve the dispute in the courts,
Mhm.
then the outcome is determined by the assertion of power. And we stop there. No solution, the assertion of power. But I think we have to think seriously about after Trump. And that after Trump is not, you go back to things the way they were. You can't put Humpty Dumpty back together again. And so you want to think it is more like the examples we had in the article were Reconstruction following the Civil War, the second Reconstruction, the Civil Rights Movement. What both of them did is you had a side that had been in power that defied the rule of law and lost. And when they lose, what takes place next is not you say, oh, well, now integrate your schools and we're done. No, you have to remake the legal order. The civil rights, the Voting Rights Acts, which the Roberts Court has eviscerated in unprincipled ways, were about power. Power that allowed the creation of a multiracial democracy in the South. When you look at Reconstruction, those who had been in the Confederate Army weren't allowed to vote, weren't allowed to hold public office. This is part of that clause in the Constitution about insurrectionists being ineligible to hold public office. The assertion of power means, yes, we need criminal prosecutions. We need the discrediting of people who caused the disasters that haven't yet happened. We need a new regime that says it's not just they're wrong. Oh, sorry. It's kind of like Nicole Wallace or any number of other never Trumpers. Repent and we'll welcome you back into the fold. No, they should be disbarred. They should be prohibited from ever holding public office again. And this is not because of the ideology of their views. It is because of the destruction of the rule of law, of the interests of the United States, of disloyalty to the institutions that are critical to our governance. Now, I don't know how to do this. I'm not a revolutionary by inclination. I'm more of a welcoming people back into the fold once they repent type person. But I think we have to think seriously at the breaches that have occurred and say the people responsible for them need to be discredited. And the recreation of institutions requires the conscious selection of a different class of people.
Well, Bill, I mean, go ahead. You were about to say something.
Yeah, so let me do something that the viewers could do. Go watch The Con, because we explained and in a lot of detail two things that summarize much of what we've just been saying. One is the Gresham's dynamic. When you gain a competitive advantage by cheating, bad ethics will drive good ethics out of the marketplace and out of government and out of professions. The second is Bastiat. When plunder becomes a way of life for people in power, they create laws that authorize plunder and a moral code that glorifies it. That's what we have in these circumstances. And we have done a real world test of all the economic claims that professionalism and the self-interest of a professional maintaining a reputation for independence and expert judgment is overwhelmingly a failure at the highest levels. And to June's point, we've done a real world test of who's for democracy, who's for the rule of law, who's for ethics, who's for truth, and who is the opposite of those things. So yes, there should be enormous consequences for the people that chose to lie, and in particular, the rich people that chose to lie and further enrich themselves. June isn't condemning somebody who's a storekeeper that, to deal with some insane regulation, feels they need to bribe the inspector on some non-health issue just to stay in business because the health inspector is really an extortionist, right? That's not what we're talking about. We've run that real world test. And of course, it should have consequences. People have revealed what it is that they truly value. And the people that chose against truth, against the rule of law, against ethics, against most everything that made America its strengths, they should not govern. They should not govern ever again. They should not govern corporations and be the robber barons and allowed to exist, because they will create this situation again. And now they have the game plan, and they see how easy it is to get the supposed elite protectionists to not just abandon the field, but to switch sides and become the modern Quislings.
Marc, you were talking about earlier the consequences of Treblinka and Auschwitz and everything that we could see and hear and probably feel when you're in that environment as well. That's a horrific consequences of inaction, of holding the corruption to account because of these diabolical lies and the complicity. And people are asking, so what are the Democrats doing, right? Where is the leadership on the Democratic side of the House? What are we going to do? What is the leadership in the midterms? How are we going to turn the tables on this? And that's what we've been talking about from the beginning. And you particularly have a plan of action. I'm wondering in this final kind of leg of this discussion today, if you care to kind of transpose, obviously in the midst of the turmoil of coming back from Europe and that perspective, but also
Yeah.
in light
Yeah.
of your own, your own life, quite frankly.
Right. Well, don't tell me what you believe. Show me what you believe. Is what all patriots need to do right now in this country at this time, and find a way. And hopefully we're working to find a way to make this easier for people. But find a way to resist. If you're a lawyer, if you're an influencer, if you're a blogger, if you write on Substack, if you have technical skills that can help match people to needs of problems, this is a chance in a time in history that you need to be the people that step up. I mean, we've seen some opportunities here in Ohio. There's going to be some opportunities in Texas over the redistricting that's going on down there. There's going to be an opportunity. It looks like for a collateral attack on a merger that the FTC has decided to greenlight after essentially a transactional series of essentially acquiescence to lobbyists who were richly paid, and I'm sure to folks in the Trump world that were also richly paid. But there's a Watergate era law that allows a judge to independently evaluate that merger, and to make a determination about whether the folks that made that decision were influenced by lobbyists. Exactly what we're seeing happen. I hope that judge steps up and does that. I hope that the nonprofit groups, anybody that withstanding the customers of those in those fields, they bring those private antitrust cases and challenge that merger. Norfolk and Southern is another one. Anybody that transports goods, anybody that buys products that are transported, that's a huge. The idea that there'll be one freight train company basically in the entire United States. And that merger was announced this week, and then I think the headline in the Wall Street Journal was, all the handcuffs are off, merge away. I may have oversimplified it, but that was essentially what the story was about. But uh, people who ship, companies who ship goods, call your lawyer and challenge that merger, um, because you have standing to do that. And if you're a rail shipper and you can and because you don't even need a good economist like Bill or June to be able to tell you that if you only have one train rail company, that the price of rail service is going to go up. And but so that those are the kinds of things. What can you do? Everybody needs to make their own safety plan. What are you going to do so that when your kids ask you what you did at this time in history, that you'll have something to tell them?
Right. And it's definitely on that note. I mean, they're talking about the robber barons. And if this is our movie, what role do you play? And the
Yeah.
role of the new untouchables is to elevate truth over the madness of lies. And they also have years and years and years of demonstrated success at being able to work professionally within the Constitution and the law to take down, through investigations and indictments and convictions, of organized crime.
Yeah.
That's what this is. And without the law, without the integrity of the law, we're the Titanic. And that's what it looks like in real time. And on that note, I'll bid you all adieu till next week, but always keep the faith, because when you have people who know what's going on, we have a chance. So thank you so much for your wisdom and your insight, and have a wonderful weekend. And we'll talk to you guys next week.
Thank you. Thanks, Patrick.
Thank
Thank
you.
Bill, June.
Yes, good to see you.